Hello, everyone. Welcome back to episode 2 of Rats in Boilersuits, which we've now got a name for, which we didn't the first time, but you didn't notice, so that's fine. My name is Kim, and this is Steph. We are gradually making our way through a rewatch of Torchwood right from the beginning, and you are coming along with us for the journey. Today, we are looking at episode 2 of series 1, titled Day 1, which is confusing because it's episode 2, but it all makes sense, really, doesn't it?
It's one of two. This is my favourite fact about Torchwood, is that there are 2 episodes. There's only 41 episodes of Torchwood in total. 2 of them are called Day 1.
Is it the first episode of Children of Earth? It's the other one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Steph, would you like to give a brief synopsis of Day 1, episode 2?
Okay. So, Day 1, which is episode 2 of Torchwood, is Gwen's first day working for Torchwood. And it starts earlier. I mean, it's unclear, but it seems that she wasn't really meant to be coming in as early as she was. But then a meteorite lands in the middle of Cardiff. And so suddenly they have to get to work. On her first day, Gwen clumsily releases an alien gas from the meteorite.
Clumsy Gwen.
And that...
Silly Gwen, what's she like?
What's she like, eh? I mean, it's her first day. You've got to cut her some slack. But that gas possesses a 19-year-old girl called Caris, and
then what happens, Steph? What happens?
Well, let's see if I can put it delicately. It sort of turns her into a kind of alien vampire,
sure,
feeding on the energy of humans,
and
killing them in the process.
Correct.
However, unlike your traditional vampires, which might feed on the blood of humans. This alien gas feeds on male orgasms.
It sure does.
And that's not a description. She explicitly says male human orgasms.
Yeah.
We might get into that. The implications of that a bit.
There's a lot to unpack here.
But what it means is this troubled 19-year-old girl is now possessed by an alien gas that is making her have sex with random people and killing them in the process.
Yep. And that's Torchwood.
So Torchwood has this hunt to try and find her, and most of them, the established members of Torchwood, just want to get her off the street. As far as they're concerned, she's a murderer. This is dangerous. Let's sort that out. Gwen is a bit more human about the whole thing. She sort of has empathy for this lost girl. Mm-hmm. There's a human cost to the person who's been possessed. And so there's a bit of tension between Gwen, who wants to save Caris, and Torchwood, who are like, they don't really care. They just want to get her off the street.
And Torchwood, who are like, let's eat Chinese food.
Yes. So that's your plot.
Yeah.
And then it's kind of a way for, like, there's loads and loads of talk about sex in this and sexuality, and it's all very weird.
Yeah, it's just, there's a lot going on. And who wrote this episode?
So this is Chris Chibnall. He's one of those guys who does a lot of like random episodes of Doctor Who under Russell T Davies and Stephen Moffat. He writes loads of crime. So he was behind Law and Order UK. He wrote a bunch of Life on Mars. I believe he wrote some Ashes to Ashes.
Okay.
And Broadchurch, A Crime Show, is what he's best known for. So he's interesting on Torchwood because he's brought in as a lead writer. So even though this is Russell T Davies's concept, he doesn't really have time to oversee it the way he does Doctor Who. So as well as being a writer of this episode and 2 others this series, Chibnall's also in charge of coordinating the whole thing.
Yeah.
Chris Chibnall now is showrunner of Doctor Who. So I think there's a lot of people were looking at Torchwood to work out what his Doctor Who might be like.
Yeah.
And if they did, it's nothing like that. Because I think the thing that's interesting about Chris Chibnall's Doctor Who is that it's a very sexless show. There's like, it's quite platonic. It's like a children's show where sex doesn't factor, which is very different from all other modern 21st century versions of Doctor Who.
Yeah.
Where sex has always been quite a big thing.
Yeah, because you were saying, like, so Russell didn't have the time to dedicate as much attention to it as he did with Doctor Who. And I was going to be like, oh, and look what fucking happened. Like, he left him alone for 1 minute and episode 2 is about a sex monster. But then everything Russell writes is full of sex. So I don't think it would have been much different, to be honest.
So this is my theory, is that Russell T Davies came up with a pitch and a concept for this show.
Yeah.
And then made someone else write it. And I think it plays to Russell T Davies' strengths a lot. Not just his strengths, but also his interests. Like, he loves sex. All his work's all about sex.
Bloody loves it.
And he's giving it to a man who's like, actually, no, you look at the rest of Chris Chibnall's work. I just don't think that's something he wants to explore in his writing particularly. And his job now is to write... I mean, we're going to talk a lot about this episode's views on sex by the end. I think Russell T Davies is like... He has the values of a gay man of his generation. He's more progressive in many ways and more sexually open than a lot of straight men of his age.
Yeah.
But he's still... he's a generation older than us, and the whole point with sexual progressiveness is that it's a constant, it's a moving target. So what would be in the 80s when he was a student, like, really sort of, oh my God, just sexually liberating, by now is like quite tame and conservative in a lot of ways.
Yeah. So this episode is mental. It starts with Reese and Gwen are out bowling together. There's one weird bit that's it's not of any importance or anything, but when she gets a good shot and then it pauses on Reese's face and he looks so offended. Yeah. It's really weird. And I always every time I watch it, even though I've seen it hundreds of times, I always think they're foreshadowing something, but they're not.
Yeah.
They're just having a nice day, and she's like, yeah, I knocked the pins down, and he's like...
It's really weird, isn't it?
I just thought that was really strange.
Maybe he's just really cares about bowling.
Maybe.
So we then see them having lunch, or having dinner together.
Yeah.
And Reese is asking her questions about her job.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got to make a point here, which is she is terrible at deflecting these questions.
Yeah, she is.
Because there's a way of deflecting a question, which is you just make the thing sound boring.
Yeah. You know what she could have done? She could have been like, oh, I saw DNA in it.
Yeah. Yes. Just act like you're bored by it. Because he never asked about her police job because she just made it sound really boring.
Yeah, exactly.
So Torchwood has hired someone to be part of a secret organisation. And I would say one of the most important skills there is the ability to lie.
Yeah, but that's the thing, though. That's the thing that gets me about this. They say that she's going to start on Monday, but she's about to have to start earlier. And I need to know what happened in between that. Later in the episode, Jack doesn't know that she doesn't know how to use a gun. She hasn't been in the Jeep because she's not seen all the tech in there and she's shocked by it. So, it was the last time they met just on the roof of WMC, and then Jack's been like, hiya, mate. So, basically, if you could just pop down the hub on Monday at 9, I'll see you there. And that's it. There's no information whatsoever. So he's not checked if she's a spy or if she's good at keeping a secret. It's very strange.
And there's so many points in this episode where she's judged for failing to do stuff that's like, no, that's not her being incompetent. That's your procedure. You should have taught her that.
Yeah, and also, Torchwood is an organisation that should really be background checking anyone they're thinking of hiring. She goes in later and they're like, oh, you've got a boyfriend? I would have thought if they were going to hire her, within 3 hours, Tosh would have had a full background check and they'd know all about her, where she was from, where her parents are, and everything they need to know, just so that Jack could have that info. And then when she comes in, they meet properly. Surely she's background checked. This is bizarre.
But maybe this is foreshadowing for Cyberwoman. If you don't ask someone explicitly if they have a partner.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, maybe. So they're at the restaurant and a big fireball is flying across the sky. Immediately, she's interested enough that she wants to follow it. And Reese is like, mate, we haven't even paid. And she's like, oh, come on. And I really like how quickly Reese is just like, oh, yeah, right then.
Yeah. He's very accommodating, Reese. That's such a big thing.
He is. He's a good boyfriend.
He is a good boyfriend. So
Reese is happy to run towards it. And then this is my favourite bit ever that I told you about. I look forward to this every time I watch this episode. So Gwen is about to be called into her super secret government organisation job. And the way that Jack calls her to work is she receives a text message. No, I'm sorry. She receives an MMS, a multimedia message that is just a picture of the Torchwood logo. With no details whatsoever. It's just that. And she just looks at Reese. She's like, I gotta go to work.
Imagine any boss doing that. If you worked in a supermarket and if they're short-staffed, so you wake up to just an image of the Morrisons logo.
I was going to say Tesco, but yeah, same day.
So funny. Because also, Jack will have just seen this thing. So the time that it takes Gwen and Reese to run to the meteor is the time that Jack's had to decide what he's going to do. And the decision he reaches is that he's going to call Gwen into work.
Yeah.
And the way he's decided, does he have the image of the logo ready to go?
Yeah, maybe.
He's like, I don't have time to text.
She's in town, and I can't imagine they wouldn't have gone through town to get there. He should have just called her and been like, "Hiya, Gwen, are you at home?" She'd be like, "Oh no, I'm actually in town." He'd be like, "Oh, that's amazing. Can you just go by like the Hilton and we'll pick you up on the roundabout?" And then
yeah.
Stupid company.
Yeah.
It's not like in 2006 people would have been like, "Oh, a picture message. That's exciting." It's not how it works.
Well, do you know what it is? I think this is a common thing in telly. I think this is still true to a certain extent. The TV companies are quite bad at making mobile phones and laptops and computers realistic. Like the number of times people are using outdated technology, or they just use technology in a way that we wouldn't in the real world.
Yeah,
because I don't think it's meant to be an image. I think in the script it just says she gets a text and it's one word, Torchwood.
Yeah, true. That'll be absolutely
decided to illustrate that with an image. Which doesn't make it normal. Like, it's still weird if your boss just texts you the name of the of the organisation you work for. Like, if you're an important police officer and you need to be called in on a case, I don't think you just get texted the word police.
Yeah.
You know that thing where like your gran puts something on your Facebook and you're like, no, gran, that's not how Facebook works. And Jack's very old.
That's true. I don't think we can give him the same benefit of the doubt as you would your nan, though.
No, that's true. He's meant to work with alien technology.
Maybe it was Yanto.
Maybe it was Yanto. I think he'd have been more on top of it. I love the idea that Yanto's like, this is a bad way of doing it. And Jack's like, look, who's the boss? I want an image of the logo when people are called into it.
So, after Gwen receives the picture of the Torchwood logo, the next thing we see is she's in the car with the rest of them, and they're on their way to find out what the meteor was. The car is rushing to the meteor. Gwen clearly hasn't been trained yet, and then like the keyboards, the computer keyboards just come down in front of her face, and she's really shocked by the text. So she's definitely not been inside the Jeep yet.
The thing that strikes me about it is like, I think the idea if we're meant to be like, oh, the Jeep is so cool, look at all the tech it's got in it, but it's like a child's done it. Like it's like a full keyboard that like flips down like a tray.
Why is it not touchscreen? It's not like they didn't know touchscreen would be a thing.
Everything in this is so huge. Like they have these earpieces that are like absolutely massive.
Oh yeah, Jack's season 1 earpiece is a bit much. Like it's like here. He would have been better off with like a Steps or S Club 7 style microphone on his face.
Yeah, that's it. When Britney Spears has better tech than your secret alien hunting organisation, you need to upgrade.
Yeah, Britney Spears, the one who beat Usain Bolt's record. Do you know about that?
I don't know about this.
Britney Spears recently tweeted, "Oh, I did my first under X amount of time, 100 meters or something, and it was faster than Usain Bolt." And everyone was like, "Sorry, is Britney claiming that she beat Usain Bolt's record?" And then she tried to pass it off as a joke, but no one really knows why she got confused. So I wouldn't put it past her, Steph, to have better technology than Torchwood. Who knows what she's hiding?
So they get to the meteorite and the army have got there first, and Owen refers to them as amateurs.
Mm-hmm.
Torchwood calling the army amateurs is like Britney Spears claiming she's faster than Usain Bolt.
Yeah, it is.
So they get there and Jack says usual formation, and Gwen checks with Owen what's the usual formation because she has received no training.
Yeah, exactly.
And Owen says, well, it varies, and she goes, how can the usual formation vary?
Because it's Torchwood.
I think there's no usual formation. Jack just likes saying army words.
Yeah, true. He's a military man. I'd like to nominate the Torchwood logo MMS as the most Torchwood moment of this episode.
Oh, yes.
And I'd like to nominate usual formation as a very Torchwood moment of this episode.
That's very good, yeah. So every week we look for the most perfect Torchwood moment, and I think the Torchwood text message is definitely up there. And the fact that they have a usual formation that means nothing. They've learned no information from being told information.
Because, like, back to the Gwen training thing for a second, it's just like so many jobs I've had in, like, retail and stuff. You know, those jobs where you start and your first day is filling out rubbish paperwork. You are dealing with a customer who is being confrontational. Do you, A, punch them in the face? B, and it's just like all these bullshit answers. We have to do risk assessments. I had to do risk assessments for the clothes shop I worked in, risk assessment for the card shop I worked in. And yet Gwen clearly knows nothing about this company. And there's been no risk assessment. Yeah. It's just such a hazard.
And also, that the reason she's joined is because their last employee killed herself having already murdered several people.
Yeah.
So you'd think they'd be particularly hot on making sure this one isn't unstable.
Yeah, because that's another thing. Like, it's obviously not been too long because she's just joined. It's like an emergency and they said start on Monday. So I would say it's been like max a week. I assume it's actually closer than that. It's probably like 3 days. But like, why are they not mourning? Like, I know that she turned out to be not who they thought she was and she did something horrific, but they've worked with this woman for years. She was close to them. They just put her in a little frozen thing and now they're like, okay, let's all move on with our lives and pretend that never happened.
Yeah.
Unless, of course, Owen is very rude to Gwen in this one. That could be his way of grieving.
That's
Maybe he
true,
feels
actually.
angry that she's being replaced. Because I just thought he was being a twat throughout the whole thing, but that might actually be one of the few depictions of them grieving over their colleague, for one.
That's a really nice reading, actually, because it slightly upsets me how horrible Owen is in this episode.
Yeah.
Because Jack and Yanto just seem as much Jack and Yanto as ever. And we know that Yanto secretly has more stuff going on than this anyway. But Tosh seems very meek. I think she's always seems quite introverted, but she seems more so here, so maybe she's gone into her shell a little bit because she's a bit shell-shocked. Okay, I like that reading.
Gwen has also she keeps saying like, oh, you can't have this technology. This is the police software. How have you got this? You can't have this. And Jack's like, stop saying you and start saying we. Like, we've literally just hired you, you idiot.
Yeah, Gwen hasn't accepted yet that she's part of Torchwood. She keeps talking about the organisation as separate from her.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a huge thing in this show is whether you identify as a member of Torchwood and what it means to do so. Because so far, everyone we've seen who's accepted that they are part of Torchwood, it's kind of ruined their lives.
Yeah.
I wanted to make one quick point as well, which is that when Gwen talks to the army, they refer to her as a little girl, I think. And Jack stands up for her in the most disgusting possible way.
Yeah, he does. But, right, this is the thing that I have about Jack. So he says, from where I'm standing, all the right curves in all the right places, right?
Yeah.
I've listened to a few, like, audio stories of Torchwood, and the one thing that always pisses me off is that people cannot write Jack. He is not a sexual predator at all. The whole idea of Jack and how we meet him is he's confident, but he's not creepy. The direction that they take Jack and Gwen's relationship is so confusing and so unclear, and this to me seems like someone who doesn't know how to write Jack.
Yeah.
It just doesn't seem like something Jack would say. He might say it to her in private if they had developed that relationship, because they've already been a little bit flirty and starey from the start. But in front of army men, like, yeah, it's just a bit weird. But I don't think that is the real Jack, personally.
Yeah, I agree. I think it comes back to the fact that Jack is a Russell T Davies creation, and Russell T Davies writes lots of men who like sex, but they're not creepy with it, and they are very good at flirting, but they appreciate the people they're flirting with. They're like, you and I are equals and we could have fun together. Like, it's objectifying, but it's like we're playing the game of objectifying each other together.
Yeah, I thought that was a bit weird. So they are inspecting the meteor. Jack is throwing tools towards Owen. Owen does a few unfair, mean quips to Gwen. Like, he's just not nice to her at all. And then she makes some innuendo about, like, oh, it's a shame your tool's not big enough for the job, and throws him a tool that he's asked for. But she throws it a bit hard and he can't catch it, and instead it goes right into the meteor and unleashes a gas. They all have to grab gas masks. The gas flies into the air and disappears, and they don't know what it is. And then they're like, oops. And they have to go and find out what's happened.
Yeah, Gwen is being bullied here.
Yeah, it's workplace bullying.
I really feel for her because, like, I think a lot of people respond to bullying. When people are that hostile to you, you're trying to work out what is the thing I can do that makes this stop.
Yeah.
And it should be enough for her to say, this isn't acceptable. But, I mean, she's come from the police, which traditionally has problems with bullying, so maybe this is something
true.
she's not particularly. She's just like, oh, this is how people operate.
Yeah, but it's just weird that like Jack doesn't stick up for him, or when Owen's like, all right, sweetheart, and then she's like, not sweetheart, Gwen, I'm sure you can manage saying my name. But maybe it's because like maybe the others don't stick up for her because they're like, oh cool, she can defend herself, that's good. Like hopefully eventually she manages to beat Owen down. Because
so my reading here is that it can be hard to call bullying out, like especially if it's someone you know and like. And I do think people like Owen. I think it's easy to go, oh, it's just banter, and to explain it away. Otherwise, they have to accept that their friend and colleague is a bully, and that there's a problem to solve.
Yeah,
it's not genuine banter. It's she's being bullied and she's trying to give as good as she gets.
Yeah,
but that's not the paradigm. They're not playing. So that's why she throws the tool, is because she feels insecure. She feels like she's not being welcomed into this team. She thinks, I'll do what they do, so I'll put them down and I'll throw tools as well, because that's what we do.
Yeah, she looks uncomfortable, but I think you're right. It's like, yeah, she's trying to defend herself. One note I did have written here was like, the gas, I mean, it wasn't good, was it? The gas is harmful, as we're about to find out, but it could have been literally the worst thing in the world. It's like, day one, Gwen destroys the earth. It's like, who knows what that could have been? That's horrible. Maybe if she was trained, this wouldn't have happened.
Yeah, it could have been alien coronavirus.
It could have been alien coronavirus. So, we don't know where the gas has gone. Then we know where the gas has gone. We see a girl in the alleyway next to a nightclub on the phone. She's obviously calling an ex-boyfriend kind of drunkenly. She's frustrated at him. Something appears behind her. And what we see is that it's the gas, and it's like purple, and it kind of goes through her like a ghost and is now inside her body.
So this is Caris. She's played by Sarah Gregory, who's a brilliant Welsh language actor as well.
My sister used to work with her in a place that it wouldn't really be appropriate to screen this episode of Torchwood. Very different audience. But my sister comes home to me one day and is like, oh, Kimmy, someone I work with, she said she was in that show that you like. What's it called? Torchwood? And I was like, oh yeah, cool. What episode was it? And she's like, oh, she said it was a bit of a weird one. And I was like, doesn't narrow it down, but sure, go on. She's like, yeah, it was, she was this character who like got possessed by like some gas or something. And I was like, yeah. Sex monster, was it? She was like, yeah, sounds really weird. I'm like, yeah, we won't talk about that. But my sister just comes away from it like, I don't know what this Torchwood thing is, but I don't think it's for me.
The thing is, the actual performance Sarah Gregory gives is so good, I think. She plays like a damaged and ill-treated 19-year-old, like with real sympathy and pathos.
Yeah.
But all anyone's going to remember is she played the sex gas monster.
Yeah. She does it very well.
She does. So when we're introduced to her, she's on the phone, and we find out that, and this extends the narrative of this episode, what it's got to say about sex, which is that Caris is talking to a guy, and she's clearly fallen for the guy, and he's kind of giving her the cold shoulder. And it's because this guy has a girlfriend already, and clearly Caris was just like a bit of fun, like a one-night stand or something. And she's misunderstood and thought this is a proper relationship. So she's now heartbroken because the guy's ignoring her calls.
Yeah.
So even before she's possessed by the sex gas monster, we are shown in this episode that sex is a source of misery.
Yeah.
I think almost all sex in this episode is portrayed as something dirty and horrible and unpleasant.
Yeah.
And it's about to get worse because then she gets possessed by the gas.
Yeah. So Caris gets possessed by this gas monster. She then walks back into the club, expecting to be able to go back in, but the bouncers are like, oh, there's no readmission. And to get herself back into the club, she just grabs the bouncer and kisses him. And in a kind of a shocked and excited state, I guess, he just lets her back in. She walks through the club. She spots a guy who's just standing by the bar on his own. And then basically they immediately walk towards each other. And then next thing we know, they're in the toilet. And then they just start having sex on the sink in the toilet. And that's all we know so far.
All of this is so extraordinary. I think...
Extraordinary. It sure is.
Like, I mean, teenagers would have been watching this show, and I think they're being taught some wrong lessons here. If you're not being admitted into a club, if a bouncer is saying no, I think one of the few things that could make a bouncer double down hardest on the decision not to readmit you is if you start kissing him.
I don't know, Steph. I've met some lovely bouncers in my day, but I've met a lot of bouncers who are creepy enough that I'm sure that would absolutely work for them.
Okay. There we go. That's my naivety. I have too much faith in the bouncer
too much faith
system.
in men with power here.
Yeah, I mean, there's 3 bouncers there as well. Like, there's the one who gets kissed, there's 2 other people with him, and I just think, surely one of them would be like, I mean, if she's kissing you to get back in, she's too drunk to be in there.
Yeah, but he does say, so he's like, watch and learn, boys, to them. So the vibe is that he's the head bouncer and that they're kind of training, and I guess they feel like they can't say anything because they're like, oh, I guess this is just what you do. You wait for a teenage girl to kiss you, and then you let them go in and drink. That sounds sensible.
Yeah. The only note I've written on the guy who has sex in the toilet, it's just 4 words. I've written them in capital letters. It's, he comes to death. Which, like, because I thought about being sensitive about the phrasing of it, and
no, we can't get around it. The bullet point I have it on is poof, gone, dust. It all just happened so quickly.
Yours is so whimsical.
Ooh, spooky. So, Karis been possessed. The guy dies in the toilet. As he orgasms, he just turns to dust on the floor, and he's just gone. One thing I did like, actually, is when they're coming in, they're clearly about to have sex, and one of the other girls in the toilet is like, oh, come on, let's go. She's not like, oh my God, why are these people fucking in the toilet?
Yeah.
Like, I've seen some dodgy things on nights out, but I don't think I've seen people just like completely just absolutely having sex on a toilet sink.
When I was like a young teenager, I absolutely assumed that clubbing, people were just having sex, you know, like in toilets all the time, not even bothering to go into a cubicle, just, you know, at the sink.
Sure.
And like, that's not the case.
No, it's like it's written by a teenager.
Yeah.
Weird.
So Torchwood turn up to investigate the nightclub, and the police are already there, which means Gwen bumps into her old colleague, PC Andy.
Yeah, she does. Andy. I want a little fanfare every time Andy's on screen.
Oh, yeah. He's so good.
He's just the best.
And it's clear that he has no idea. This really feeds into your theory that only a couple of days have passed since she joined Torchwood.
Yeah.
She's not saying any goodbyes. Like, she mentions...
He's like, oh, we all wondered what happened to you.
Yeah. So there's not been a leaving do. She's not even, you know, popped round to say...
That's your biggest concern, is it? There's not been a leaving do.
Well, I just think, you know, because I used to work in an office with quite a high turnover of staff, and the reasons people left were always really varied. And, you know, maybe someone's retiring, maybe someone's going freelance, someone's moving departments, or, you know, like loads and loads and loads of different factors. But with every single one, you still have a bit of a leaving do, and that it'd still be, you'd mark the occasion. Mm-hmm. And maybe I'm just reading the relationship wrong, but I sort of thought, well, Andy and Gwen, they get on really well. They have jokes and they enjoy walking the beat together. You know, this is like a work mate. And she's not bothered phoning him up to say where she's going. Like, he had no idea. And when he finds out it's Torchwood, he's like, oh, okay, that figures, because they're really secretive. But it's weird, because Torchwood aren't secretive about who the members are. You know, they turn up in a big car, you can just see them.
Yeah, it's very strange. I don't know if I find it super weird that Andy wouldn't know, because Gwen's been really busy. And we also find out later in the season that their friendship is kind of like, Andy has obviously fancied her before, and it's been a thing before, and she's aware. So maybe they're not super close, but they have a friendship, and she kind of keeps him within a boundary. I don't know. The thing I found weird was Jack, her boss, who's run ahead. Jack appears towards the stairs and is like, Gwenny, are you coming? And she's like, oh yeah, sorry, I gotta go, to Andy. And he looks so offended by it. He looks really pissed off that she's got to go and do her job, which I thought was a bit unnecessary. You know, she's got a new job.
Yeah, I think he's jealous. I think he's quite a jealous type, Andy.
Yeah, I bet she's getting in on all that modern DNA rubbish.
Yeah, he wanted to be the one solving the crimes. I think he grew up on detective novels and he wanted to be the one solving the murder.
Secretly, Andy is really excited by DNA technology and he's desperate to be involved.
He wants to be the sole investigator in a PC Andy series.
Oh, what a spin-off.
What a spin-off. But for it to make any sense, the PC Andy series would have to be a series of crimes where he just, it's other people that solve it, and he's just increasingly frustrated.
Yeah. So after the interaction with Andy, they go into the club and the bouncer that she kissed shows the pile of dust on the floor and is like, this is a dead guy. And they're like, oh my God, how did you know that this used to be a person? And it flashes back to him watching this happen live on CCTV whilst having a wank. But like, that implies that he told them, oh, I was wanking to it. That's how I know. Why did he need to tell them that?
Yeah.
Why couldn't he just be like, oh, I actually saw it on CCTV and I ran down, but it was too late? Why did he have to admit that?
Yeah. So we find out that Torchwood is their first port of call is they're going to fake this death. So they're going to find a body that they're going to mangle the face so that the family don't realise that this guy died of alien causes.
Gwen's quite shocked by that. She's like, what, you're just going to lie? And Jack's like, oh, you'd rather us tell his family that he died screwing an alien? And also, yes, we do have a stash of bodies. Don't worry about it.
It's really weird. So as a bit of research, I've been watching The X-Files because I knew that was an obvious comparison for this show. And this is a very X-Files-y story. Something weird happens, they investigate it, and it leads to kind of horror and action situations. But the one thing that's really different from the X-Files is that Mulder in the X-Files is all about revealing the truth and going, there shouldn't be a conspiracy, there shouldn't be a cover-up. If we find out that there's aliens involved, then the public have a right to know.
Sure.
Whereas here, they're like, no matter how minor the alien technology, we are going to be covering that up, and that's just fine. Like, our protagonists are actively involved in conspiracy, and that extends to faking people's deaths. I don't like that Torchwood have a stash of bodies.
Yeah, I guess from Jack's experience with what Torchwood used to be and humans' reactions to aliens, humans react very angrily to these things. So he says that their job is to like catch and categorize and research alien stuff, but fundamentally I think it's also on a level to keep the aliens safe and to prevent mass panic. But strange that not even his family could know that something suspicious happened.
Yeah. So then we get into the relationship stuff. So we're in Torchwood. We get more evidence that Gwen sees herself as an outsider, and we find out that every single member of Torchwood is single, and also that they have no hobbies. They can't switch off.
Yeah. One thing I liked about that is between the previous scene and that, we have Karis sort of staring off into the distance while her dad is talking to her, and like she is clearly like traumatized and confused about what's going on. Then we go straight to Torchwood and they have that discussion. So already I thought it was nice that they're pairing the crisis of this teenage girl against Gwen's humanness brought into Torchwood. Putting those two things next to each other I thought was a really good way to show that Gwen is going to be the one who actually cares about this poor child, basically. She's only 18. Owen's been horrible to Gwen. In between that, she does the us and them kind of thing as well. She discovers that they have a database with every face in the UK on it, and they're flicking through to try and find who this dead man could be. She's like, that's against people's rights. What are you doing? And I'm like, what if the guy was foreign? Yeah. What does every face in the UK mean? Like, what if he was just like a flight attendant in Cardiff for one night and one night only, and then he dies and they're never gonna find who he was? Yeah. That would be a shame. There is the nice line of Yanto when they're like, oh, damn it, we can't get a CCTV match of this guy. And he's like, I could check the old-fashioned way with my eyes, if you like.
He's very funny. Gareth David Lloyd, who plays Yanto, has such a good line in...
Very good, yeah. His tone of stuff is perfect.
Yeah. Back at Karis, she is visited by a postman who she tries to shag to death, as is her USP.
Yes. I like that you say visited by her postman. Like he's just he's trying to give her post. She just won't let him.
Yeah. Well, it's weird because he seems to know her, and I don't like. He knows who she is, and apparently she orders loads of stuff. Like she does a lot of buying online, I guess. So he knows her by name.
Yeah, I think it's quite a nice subtle way of trying to remind the audience that this is a teenage girl with like she's just buying clothes. She's going out. Like it really brings her back down to earth, where you're like, oh, she has a personhood and a life.
Yeah, true. We get some insight into her that's not about her sex life, because we're introduced to her on the phone talking to someone she's slept with, then realizing no, she's got a dad and she buys things, and there's something quite domestic about it. Mm-hmm. Something that really tickles me about this scene is that, like, the postman just doesn't believe her. She's in a dressing gown, she pulls him on top of her on a sofa, and he's still like, no, this isn't happening. He thinks it's a prank. Yeah. He's like, who put you up to this then? Was it...
All right, Karis, joke over.
Yeah.
And then does he say, he's like, who put you up to this? And it's like he thought it was her dad that put her up to it.
Oh, yeah, I didn't check the name.
A strange take.
Yeah, I mean, it can't have been. But it's weird. Maybe they're just friends. Maybe she just happens to have a friend who is a postman.
Maybe.
But it's really interesting because, like, we know that Karis is someone who has a sex life because she slept with this other guy. But I think he just sees her as a child because the idea of her being sexually active is funny to him. He's like... I mean, he's a bit alarmed, but he's also thinking she can only be doing this as a joke.
Yeah. It's nice that someone in the episode is appreciating the fact that she's a child, isn't it?
Yeah.
And even her room, the way her room, the set is dressed is like a young teenage girl.
Mm.
The way her mirror's set up and when she's like brushing her hair and stuff.
Do you know what? I was the same age as her when I watched this because I was 19. First watching this. And I think because I was 19, I was like, oh yeah, that's an adult, that's a grown-up, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, I'm watching it now, I feel more parental, I feel more protective of her.
Yeah, absolutely. So just as she's about to have sex with the postman, Torchwood bursts through the door and they're like, get out! And he's like, okay, he's very confused, he's off to deliver more parcels. Poor little man. She runs away. She's trying to leave the house, and just as she's about to leave and they're not able to catch her, Owen pulls something out of his pocket and throws it down. It looks like a rock, it lands next to her, and it creates a kind of force field shield around her, which we find out is like a portable cell, basically. Owen's just stolen again. Jack is like, Owen, what the fuck, man? I thought all the tech stayed on the base. And he was like, oh, Jack, I just caught our prisoner. And Jack's like, nah. And that's it. Again, doesn't get in trouble.
No reprimand.
This is the second time in 2 weeks.
Yeah. That was a huge deal last week that you don't get to do that. And this week...
Yeah.
Oh, Owen, again?
Yeah, ridiculous.
So funny. So, Karis is brought back to the base. She is taken to the cell that we saw the Weevil in last week.
By Gwen, who says, I don't know what to do with this prisoner. And Jack's like, don't say that in front of her, you dick. And then she goes down to the cell.
Just everything in this episode would have gone better if Gwen had received at least a little training.
And anything. A text. You could have put... Torchwood, a quick summary of what will be expected from you on your first day.
Also, she's in charge of the interview now. She interviews Karis about what's going on. And again, she's received no training. Why are you leaving? Everything Gwen has done so far has ended badly.
Yeah, Gwen has met one alien prior to this. And, like, she doesn't even know anything about them. How's she supposed to know what questions to ask? And we later proved that.
Yeah.
The only note I have about this is that the cells are disgusting.
Yeah.
Like, they're just horrible, aren't they? And I know, like, yeah, what we're seeing is how not human Torchwood has become, but they don't get any better throughout the season. And I'm like, this is an 18-year-old girl. You're just putting her in this disgusting, sweaty, smelly thing. It's just not really acceptable, is it?
Yeah, absolutely horrific. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that because I so associate the cells with the Weevils. But yeah, you're right. Like, she's already having an awful time. This is going to make it.
Yeah, would you not get her a cup of tea?
Yeah.
It's not very accommodating.
It's not accommodating, but I can absolutely see that Gwen is constantly compartmentalizing. She doesn't see herself as a member of Torchwood. She sees this as this sort of gross alien thing.
Also, she's like, she hasn't had training. She probably hasn't even had a tour of the hub. I bet she doesn't know where the tea station is.
True.
So Karis and her start chatting. I didn't notice this the last few times I watched this episode, but Karis says, you broke my ship. And we're like, oh, cool, sick. So, like, proper alien shit getting into now. And Gwen's like, who are you? Why are you coming to invade Earth? Because that's the closed-minded view of aliens that she has. Because she hasn't received any training. Yeah. Karis then says, like, oh, I'm not here to invade. I'm just here to get orgasms and leave. She basically says that Earth and humans have the best orgasms in the galaxy and that she's travelled all this way for the energy. And Gwen has a really good line where she's like, sorry, just to recap. You've travelled here to feed off orgasmic energy. Yeah. if you wanted to give someone a summary of this episode, you'd just give them that line and they'd be like, I think I might skip this one.
I like that when you phrase it as orgasmic energy, it makes it sound more sci-fi.
Yeah, true. Because it sounds like psychic energy, like it's the ick. You know,
it is the ick, isn't it? Yeah.
It's a bit better than...
Look, I need cum to live. I'm a cum vampire. What can I tell you?
I'm a cum vampire. That's awful. Oh, I don't like that at all.
This episode reminds me of Charlie Brooker's review of Torchwood, because Charlie Brooker is now best known for writing Black Mirror. But when Torchwood first came out, he was a journalist. He was writing reviews of television for The Guardian. And there's a line in his description of Torchwood that really stays with me that sums it up, which is, It's like Scooby-Doo with cum shots.
Which is the perfect description of Torchwood.
Perfect way of summing it up.
You think of that and you think of Torchwood as a whole, and you're like, sure, I guess it's a sexy show, but then, no, that is what this episode is in its entirety.
It's really silly. It's a very sort of... because it's a spin-off from a children's program, that child logic is still in there, but it's incredibly graphic.
Yeah.
It's such a weird dichotomy. And I love the idea as well. Like, we've seen Black Mirror. We know what Charlie Brooker thinks grown-up sci-fi should be like. So the idea of him watching episode 2, The Cum Vampire, no.
The idea of him watching this and thinking, oh, cool, some dark sci-fi with some adult tones, and being like, what is going on? What am I watching?
So what happens next?
So Gwen is trying to interview Karis. She obviously doesn't know what she's doing because she's not been fucking trained. She ends up in the cell with Karis, and they just start making out. They're just up against the wall making out. We cut to back upstairs, and Owen is just near the CCTV display, and he's like, oh, Gwen's making out with Karis. But he is not alarmed, and instead is really creepy and just watches it, which is disgusting. That's Owen.
It's so gross. He's like, Tosh and Jack come over, and apparently they just think this is fine too.
Yeah.
We later find out from Tosh that this alien excretes a pheromone that's incredibly powerful, and so it makes you want to sleep with her. So she's able to, essentially non-consensually, or at least dubious consent, right? Then people are choosing to sleep with her who wouldn't normally choose to sleep with her. I mean, I was watching it. I didn't need Tosh to explain that. I thought that was obvious.
Yeah, and like, that's the thing. It highlights two things. Like, one, why on earth have they sent Gwen downstairs on her own with this when they've just watched it kill someone?
Yeah.
And two, when they see Gwen going the same way as the guy that they saw die on CCTV, clearly it's like, oh shit, we've seen what happens when you kiss this alien and then maybe have sex with this alien. Yeah. They just stop for a second.
It's an incredibly weird moment. They don't seem to think there's a risk of her dying, but also they think this is just normal. And there's three things that are weird. One is that they're not considering the danger that she's in. Second, they're not considering that maybe there's something weird, psychic and alien going on here, and maybe Gwen wouldn't choose to do this normally. And thirdly, they're not going, even if it's not dangerous, even if she's entirely complicit, has full agency here.
Yeah.
Even so, you're not really meant to kiss your prisoners.
And yeah, you're not meant to kiss your prisoners. Definitely. She's not allowed a lawyer, so already she's going to be a bit like, what's going on? Now, from their point of view, someone who has like a duty of care is kissing her, and she's 18. Like, that's creepy.
So gross.
This is where we have Tosh say the line where she's like, doesn't she have a boyfriend? And Jack's like, you people in your quaint little categories. So all they seemed concerned with was, I thought Gwen was straight. I guess not.
Yeah.
The next thing that happens after they've all had a good look at Gwen kissing this teenage girl is that Jack and Tosh rush downstairs to make sure that Gwen's okay. By the time they get there, Karis has been angry that Gwen isn't a man. She obviously doesn't have that much understanding of humans' sex. And so she like rips her shirt off and is like, oh, that's not what I thought was going to be there. This isn't going to work. I need a man for the orgasmic energy. Just as that happens, Gwen leaves the cell and gets a call off Reese, who is very endearingly just checking up on her first day, unaware that she's just been kissing an 18-year-old girl. She says that it's not really the right time, but this has all happened by the time the other two make it down the stairs. And I just thought it was really weird that they get there and they see that she's on the phone outside the cell. And Jack's like, oh, you good? And Gwen's like, oh, yeah, all good. So they just walk off again. Like, they're like, no hazard here.
It's so bad. Everything about this is bad. Also, I think it's amazing that Gwen takes a personal call in front of a prisoner. Like, why is her phone even on?
Why does she have signal?
Yeah. I've done office jobs where I'm not allowed to have my phone on.
Yeah,
and that's
true.
Just because you're not meant to be on the phone during work.
Yeah.
Like, it's absurd. I mean, she was a police officer. It should be second nature for her to put her phone, or she could ignore the call, because surely Reese will understand my girlfriend's a police officer or special ops or whatever.
Reese literally says on the phone when she's like, it's kind of not a good time. He's like, oh, look at me, I'm a special ops widow. So it's not like he's going to be offended. He's clearly very supportive and understanding. She could have just busy toned him.
Yeah.
Odd. So Gwen goes upstairs. Owen's like, oh, excellent work, newbie. What a thorough investigation. and she just grabs him and like strangles him up against a wall. I don't understand why her reaction is so intense. Because yes, like he's been negging her all day, he's been bullying her all day, and like maybe she's just flipped, but she's also a police officer. It's not like she should unusually lash out at something like this. I was wondering if it was maybe just an attempt to set up some sexual tension between them. Like, but I don't know what it is.
It's a really strange moment. I mean, she's just been affected by this pheromone situation, so her head is probably all over the place. So maybe that's just coming out. She's probably sexually frustrated, actually, isn't she? Thinking about it.
Maybe, yeah.
Because her brain's like, oh, I'm about to have sex. And I can't remember the line. It's like 1,000 times as powerful as something or other. So, like, it's a really profound thing. And so it's manifesting as anger here. So
that could be
like,
it.
Let's
make it that. Yeah. Jack sees that happening and is like, throttling the staff is my job. He seems completely unfazed by this weird relationship that Owen and Gwen seems to be developing on day one, that he's been picking on her all day. Now Gwen's strangling him. He's like, let's make a joke about this. Anyone want some Chinese food? Like, and then they all just go and have lunch in the break room.
Yeah. Okay, so Yanta brings Chinese. They all have food. And at one point, Jack steps out. And the conversation over food turns to Jack. Owen and Tosh, well, Owen particularly hopes that Gwen knows stuff about Jack and can tell them. Because it turns out they don't know much about him either.
Exactly. One of the things that Owen brings up is that, like, we don't know anything about him except for him being gay. And Gwen's like, no, surely, no, he's not. Do you think? Tosh says that Owen thinks he's gay, Tosh doesn't, and Yanto's like, and I don't care. Shocker.
Yeah. So what I like about this is the rule seems to be, basically all three of them think he's the sexuality that means they'll sleep with them.
Exactly, yeah.
We're still at a point where none of them are comfortable with being bisexual yet. So, like, it hasn't occurred to them that he'll just sleep with anyone.
But then Tosh says something which I think is quite interesting. She says, I've watched him in action. He'll shag anything if it's gorgeous enough. So clearly they have just said, like, oh, he's bisexual, he's pansexual, whatever you want to call it. But they're like, they don't seem to be like, oh, that makes sense. Like, it doesn't seem like a definitive end. They're just like, oh, is he straight or is he gay? And Tosh is like, oh, I've seen that he doesn't mind. And they're like, oh, how confusing. I guess we don't have an answer.
Yeah, it's so weird to me that, like, portrayal of bisexuality on telly still isn't great.
No, it's really not.
This seems absurdly sheltered.
Like, they've never heard of it.
Well, he's from the 51st century, so he's got this new exciting space sexuality.
I've seen, like, interviews being like, he's omnisexual. And I'm like, okay, like, it's another word, root word, meaning all, fine. Like, but from their perspective, would you not... You could just say bisexual for the purposes of what we need. I guess they're trying to include aliens, but like pansexual seems to do the job. And I know it's not a very well-known term, but it's just weird that they went to omnisexual. Like they just had to make something up. Yeah. Because people like that just didn't exist.
Yeah. And so I've got a theory that it's one of these things that kind of the problem feeds itself, because the reason I think they don't say bi is because you didn't hear the word bi on TV very often.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit jarring. Even I find it jarring. Like when I watch Brooklyn Nine-Nine, which has a bi character who uses the word bi, it's always a little bit clunky because we're just not used to hearing that word on TV.
Because bisexual characters on TV, even to this day, the two options for a bisexual appearing character are either they have just turned gay, we've seen that they've been in love or had feelings for someone in what looks like a heterosexual relationship, then they have feelings for a same-sex person and now they're just gay. That's your option. Or they say, oh, I just don't want to label myself, which is fine. People have every right to not label themselves. Why should you have to put yourself in a box? That's fine. But when the only representation you see is either I've turned gay now or I don't want to label it, when we have a word that many, many people who experience that are comfortable with, why don't you just put it in? It's really, really weird. This bizarre aversion to recognising that bisexuality exists is so strange. Because I wouldn't mind if it was just I wouldn't mind if occasionally a character was like, I don't want to label myself. I have friends like that who aren't comfortable with labels. That's absolutely fine. But all of them? Come on now.
Yeah. And also, telly is rarely that progressive.
Yeah.
So the fact that you've skipped a step to no labels is like, no, I see what you're doing. You just don't want to use the word, and that's a convenient excuse.
It's weird, isn't it?
And it's the part of this that has dated the worst, I think.
Mm-hmm.
It's because we've gone from a monosexual gay man to a monosexual straight man. That's who's written this show so far.
Yeah.
So we've got a show where every character is is by on paper, but in practice, it just looks very stiff and weird. And I remember that it gets better, but at this point, all of them, apart from Jack, feel straight to me at this point, actually.
Yeah.
Because this just isn't how queer people talk about sexuality.
Yeah, absolutely. They get confused about Jack's sexuality. We don't really find a conclusion to that, but basically their conversation is interrupted by the fact that there's a noise and they quickly realise that it's Karis, the CCTV sound, who is just crying alone in the cell. Jack is back at this point. Karis is crying alone in the cell and Gwen's like, oh God, what are we doing? We're all sitting around laughing and joking while someone's in crisis. And Jack, again, like a representation of how he's gotten so sucked into this, he's lost his humanity. He's like, well, actually, I think you'll find that it's scanning all of the like air quality in the cell and checking for weird substances. And meanwhile, we're doing a DNA test. So suck on that. We do care. And Gwen's like, not what I meant, but sure.
Yeah. As far Jack really thinks it's like a great gotcha that he's like, actually, we are doing loads.
Yeah.
And you just,
we are doing loads, so it doesn't matter that she's crying. Idiot.
But and it's like Jack's assuming that he's being criticised for being
lazy.
For being an absolute. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's not the criticism. And also, you have consistently been dropping the ball on this. So even if she's not right on this occasion, she's been right all along. Yeah,
it's weird that even when challenged, he just doesn't think that she'll be asking about the fact that there's a young girl crying in a cell and instead thinks about like, I might be on lunch, but I'm working.
Yeah.
Gwen is shocked at Jack's response because clearly he just doesn't get what she's asking. And she's like, look at you all. Like, you've been down here so long, you've forgotten what it means to be human. And Jack is kind of intrigued by her because clearly this is what he sees in Gwen right from the beginning. He sees that aspect of humanity. So he's kind of aware that that's necessary to bring back to Torchwood. And he's like, fine, okay, show me what it means to be human in the 21st century. And she's like, sure.
What happens? Is this the scene where she puts together a profile of Karis?
Yeah, which is really lovely. It's very Gwen, and it's exactly what they need. She finds out, like, little conversations between Karis and her mates proving that they have normal teenage conversations to really humanise her. Little swimming badges from when she was a kid. Loads of information about where she grew up. And she puts that together, and Jack comes to see it, and he's like, whoa. And he looks really, really impressed. And you can tell he's like, this is exactly what I want from this member of my team. So Tosh has been investigating meanwhile, and they've got the results of all that stuff that was processing during their lunch break. Tosh has discovered the alien is emitting some kind of really intense pheromone that is probably why the guy had sex with her in the toilet. And Gwen's like, that makes sense. I kind of snogged her. And they're like, we know. And then they all move on. Gwen had been trying to encourage Jack to bring in Karis's dad so that she would have some company and a bit of support in this terrifying situation. But on realising that this alien releases a really strong pheromone to any man in the room, they're like, oh, shit, no, that's definitely a bad idea. And then they realise that the one person that they've left looking after Karis at the moment is Owen. And they have a panic realising that they've put him in danger. Again, they've left a member of their team alone with this deadly alien. I could have told you that would happen. Why couldn't you?
Yeah, it's so funny. This is a team that doesn't learn from its mistakes. It doesn't learn from anything. Yeah. Like, they investigate. They don't adapt their behaviour around the things that they learn. Even without knowing about the pheromones, surely Gwen should have been able to say, I don't know what was going on down there. That's not normal. Also, it's not normal. It's really not, like, just visually.
I'm just like, if they just were like, oh, okay, so she's just made out with Karis, they ran down to make sure she was okay because they're like, oh, this looks a bit like that thing that happened in the nightclub. But they're not then like, oh, should we stay away from her? Instead, they clearly just assume that must just be something that Gwen does. It's just the weirdest thing. I'd say, actually, I would nominate sending yet another person unattended to look after the sex-crazed alien. I'd nominate that as our Torchwood moment of the week again. That's pretty terrible decision-making. Because if they checked the CCTV, they would have seen Karis say, no, it's got to be a man. And they would have been like, oh, I bet that has some significance.
Yeah, that's it. You shouldn't send anyone down there. And if you're going to send anyone, it probably shouldn't be a man. They're not even checking the CCTV just to make sure.
No. Yeah, it's just so clinical. They're not looking at anything in front of their faces, are they? They're just looking at the research that they've now done.
Why bother interviewing them at all if you're not going to observe how the interview goes?
Yeah.
And use what you learn from it. So Karis is now on the loose, and she manages to get out of the hub the way she's able to do that is by threatening to break a jar with a human hand in it.
Yeah. They go to rescue Owen, who is naked, in the cell, and Karis swiped his ID card that will get her through all the doors. There was a nice moment where Gwen makes some dig about him, and her and Tosh bond over that, which is quite nice. Again, I think she's very timid in this episode, but she is on Gwen's side, and she's showing that with what she laughs at and the things that she says. The thing about the hand is, like, for all intents and purposes right now, we don't know what that hand is. But Jack seems terrified of the idea of the hand jar getting damaged and obviously wants to get it back from her safely. And the way that he decides to make sure that it's not used as a threat against him is by telling the alien that it's really valuable to him and only him. What kind of a decision was that?
He does not keep his cool at all with that hand. Also, if it's that valuable, why is it just out in the open? Torchwood are incredibly irresponsible.
Then again, when we know what the hand is for, it needs to be visible to him.
Yeah, that's true.
It's not like the knife that was just lying out on the desk, is it?
Yeah. So this is the introduction of the hand. Even though you can see it in the first episode, here our attention is drawn to it, that this hand in a jar, whatever it is a really important and valuable thing to Jack. So it's kind of setting up that mystery.
Yeah. It adds to the mystery of his character, but it's also like we don't have a lot of knowledge about what Jack's priorities are, and he seems very balanced, and they're deliberately showing him freaking out and losing his head in this bit, and it's just good to set up that there's a specific area of his backstory that is particularly important.
Yeah. And that's true, actually, and it also seems to be the most important. That is, the hand of everything in the hub, the hand is the single thing that is most important to Jack.
Yeah. Why is it so easily smashable then? That's my question.
Yeah.
You don't make some reinforced, like,
extra
tempered glass, yeah.
So Karis makes it out onto the streets of Cardiff. She is free in the bay, and I liked that there was a shot of the Glee Club, the comedy club in Cardiff, which is so dear to both our hearts.
Dear to both our hearts, that's right.
So let's talk about Owen's rat.
Yes.
So Owen manages to put some of the alien gas in the rat. Is that right? Is that what he does?
I think so, yeah. He says that he's replicating the process that's happening in Karis in this rat.
Yeah. What it shows is that this thing is also physically dangerous, that it makes your brains grow, it makes it makes various parts of you grow and squeeze out. It does something to the lungs. Anyway, what it means is eventually the rat just literally explodes. Or as Owen puts it, rat jam. Yeah,
rat jam. And at which point the demonstration rat that he has just explodes in a box. It's nice as well, actually. All we've seen so far is Owen being an absolute twat in every way. So this is Gwen and the audience of Torchwood's first time seeing why Owen is there, what his skills are, how much knowledge he has, and how much he is interested and excited in investigating the medical side of stuff like this.
Yeah, I think my take on Owen is I really like Bern Gorman, who plays him. I think he's really, really good. The character so far, and I definitely think this softens as the series goes by, but he just seems so desperately unpleasant at this point that I find that hard to get over. So we cut back to Karis. She's wandering the streets of Cardiff and she is surrounded by sexual imagery.
Yeah.
So we're just looking at the normal, like, billboards and posters and mannequins and whatever, just everything that's
she goes past House of Fraser and looks at a poster and she seems a bit stressed by that.
And I think I've got two things to say about that. One of which is, once again, this is evidence of how sexually conservative Torchwood is.
Yeah. That
it's a show about sex. There's loads of sex in it. But it's also like, ooh, look how scary and worrying and upsetting it is, though. Secondly, I'll tell you what I did think was that, like, I think this montage makes it look like they're going with the idea that she's like a sex addict. She can't just walk down the street and be normal. She's like, every single image to her, she kind of zooms right in on the sexual content. Obviously, part of that is that it's criticizing how sexual our sort of everyday life is, that we just don't really
we live in a society, you know?
But yeah, like it really feels like this is someone whose mind is so obsessed with sex that she can't operate.
Yeah. So the team are trying to figure out where she would go. So, okay, you're losing a battle against a sex-crazed alien living inside of you. It's desperate for sex, but you know that whoever you have sex with will die. What do you do? And Owen's like, I'd go around and shag you, to Gwen. Yeah. Basically just threatens to kill her. Like, he basically just outright, yeah.
His next line after that is, in our household, the single most quoted line of Torchwood. We just do this at each other when we want to wind each other up. Because, he's rebuked for the joke that he's made, Owen. And Owen's response is, what? It's a joke. Can't I have a joke with my teammates? And Bergamo holds the S in a way that is so funny to me. But also, the joke you've made is that you would just shag her to death. That's not an
it's sexually aggressive and it's a threat.
Yeah.
And you've just met her.
And the fact that I'm so obsessed with that line and we quote it all the time is because even when I was 19 and some of the bullying and negging was over my head a little bit, that line was not over my head. That was like, whoa, he said what?
Yeah. So they move on. Tosh is like, I know where I'd go. Meaning she would go to her ex's house, an ex that she hates. And she turns out to be very right about that because we go and see Karis visiting the man who she was on the phone to that night when she got possessed. So
they take the car, they go and find this ex of hers. And what happens is Tosh looks up who this is. So she's using the tech inside the car to look into which ex she might have. And I'm like, if this was a normal TV show, this is what would happen at this point, is they would go, she's gone to an ex. And Gwen goes, oh, brilliant. I know exactly who that is because of all that profiling I did.
Yeah, true.
I've got all these printouts. And that is not what happens. What happens is they have to do that work again. Like, Tosh has to look into it for her, even though we've seen it be done. There's something almost dreamlike about the way this show just flows from one thing to the next and seems to forget what's already happened.
Just retconning itself continually. But the thing is, though, it could be, again, what you said earlier was that what you got from it was that Karis and this man were never in a relationship. He is the first person that she slept with. And the vibe that we get is maybe less that he's an asshole and more that she is vulnerable, is the first person she's ever slept with, and she gets the wrong idea from a one-night stand. So it could be that that didn't come up in Gwen's thing because this is a recent couple of weeks long thing that doesn't seem relevant to Karis's life. And Tosh is just tracking and tracing COVID-19 style who she's been interacting with, maybe?
That's true. That does make sense.
So they get to the flat and they find a pile of dust because he has been shagged to death just like everybody else. Well done, Tosh. Would have been nicer if the car was faster. Then they're like, where do we go? And they're like, well, there must be more information. And Owen's like, Gwen, you did all that research. What have you got? And she's like, oh, I don't know. She mentions where Karis works. She's the receptionist in like some kind of surgery. Owen's like, oh, you're joking. That's a sperm bank. Think of that. All the guys, orgasmic energy, perfect. They go to the sperm bank. They find that there's lots of piles of dust. Again, if you guys could have just put your foot down a bit more, probably some more lives would have been saved. It's hard to know how many lives the Torchwood team are responsible for the loss of. There's some that they're directly responsible for. There's some that if they'd just been a bit more competent, they would have done it. But this is a lot. We see like 4 extra piles of dust.
None of those people would have died if they'd got to the ex-boyfriends in time. And I think they would have got to the ex-boyfriends time if Owen had explained rat jam on the way.
True. But he wanted to have his moment where he showed off his timing, yeah. And then also, like, none of this would have happened if Gwen hadn't thrown that tool into the ship and released the alien. And that wouldn't have happened if Owen wasn't being such a prick. So I think we can put all of the blame for the deaths in this episode onto Owen.
Fair.
The doctor.
I want to address the fact that it seems to be a late-night sperm donation clinic.
And there's lots of guys in the waiting room. There's like, like 6 people in there.
It's really busy. How many people are like, well, I'd love to donate sperm, but only between 9 and 10 p.m.
Well, maybe it's for working people. Maybe this is set in the winter time. It's getting dark at 6 p.m. and this is the window of people that they have for people who want to donate sperm after work. Although, the next thing we see is Karis arriving at the sperm bank, and she walks in and her receptionist colleague is like, oh, Karis, you're not in today, are you? She's not like, oh, Karis, what are you doing here at this time? She's like, oh, Karis, you're not in today, as if this would be a normal time for the start of a shift. So you're absolutely right. They do seem to have a really good nighttime shift for the sperm bank.
Well, I don't know if you've ever worked for a sperm bank, but what happens is Sometimes you just get a text with an image of the logo of the company.
And the logo of a company is just sperm.
It's just... and then you've got to drop everything and go in.
Exactly, yeah. The receptionist's surprise is because she doesn't know when these spermy texts are going to be sent out. Who can be sure?
So we see her we see her approach her first victim, and her approach is that she's going to go into all these men and say, hey, I'm here to help you out, but really she's here to feed on their orgasmic energy.
Yeah.
And the first person she tries this with is like, no, I don't need your help. She's like, come on, I can help. He's like, I don't think so, I'm gay. I kind of liked it. I quite like that moment, but also I want to know what happened to that guy.
Why did the pheromones not work on him? Does it not work on gays?
Well, this is the thing, right? And this is a problem I have sometimes with sci-fi TV when it tackles sexuality and gender, is that when you're writing something that's set in the real world, you can have someone express an opinion on gender, and even if it's a transphobic view or a homophobic view, as a viewer you can sort of go, that's not great, I don't like that, but in my head I'm just going to choose to believe that character is homophobic. It's
the character, yeah,
not the show. But with sci-fi, because you have to explain all the made-up stuff, it's much, much harder to distance yourself from problematic statements about sexuality.
That's a good point, because then it's almost like if they maybe just wanted to put the funny line in, and the theory was just that she hadn't spurted out the pheromones yet. But then it comes across like someone who has a very narrow view of sexuality is making that narrow view scientific fact.
Yeah, that monosexuality not only exists, but is sort of, you can pump a gay man full of pheromones and he will physically be unable to have sex with a woman, which, it's all very... But I like your reading, and I think that was my reading as well.
And I think, like, when we saw her eye up the guy across the club at the start of the episode, she goes to him. The next thing we see is them kissing, but we haven't seen the interaction. Maybe she does need to have a little bit of a chat first, and then it happens. So... yeah, we don't need to call the homophobia card, do we, Steph?
No, I will hold off on contacting the authorities.
The guys are still on the way to the sperm bank to try and catch her. They realise that it needs Karis as a host to survive this alien. So Karis isn't just possessed by it, but it's using her energy. She's losing the battle. They discovered that she'll turn into rat jam. With that theory, they have assessed that if they can get the ghostly, possessy alien out of her, it won't be able to survive on its own without a host, and then they can just let it die. And then Gwen is like, oh, we're just going to force it to die. A minute ago, she saw aliens as a threat, but it does seem like maybe now, because she's aware that it's kind of her fault this alien is on the loose, she's like, oh, God, I made this alien on the loose, and now it's going to die because of me. And in response, Owen is just like, well, it's been killing all those guys, so get some perspective, Gwen.
The thing is, if it wasn't an alien, it'd be easy, which is, okay, your anti-death penalty, that's perfectly understandable, but it's strange that she is able to find that kind of human empathy for a murderous gas.
Yeah.
Jack has a line here that I do think actually does sum up the episode, which is, travel across the universe for the greatest sex, you still end up dying alone.
Yeah. And
I think that is, like, again, it's a very conservative view of sex, and it's not one I share, but it does, like, this is a show where sex is a momentary relief from the constant permanent knowledge that you're going to die alone. Very unique.
Nothing to add on that. So at which point they trap Karis and they're about to try and get this alien out of her. That I can't remember how the monologue is. My only bullet point is weird monologue about sex. So
is that
Karis? Yeah, Karis is like she's trying to explain it to them, and she's like, oh, sex is it's all we want, but we fear it so much. And I'm like, yeah, is it? Do we? Are you all right? I don't understand. Like, all right.
Again, it's a really, really conservative speech. It's, we crave it, but we fear it. Again, it feels very teenage. And I don't know if that's meant to be a character thing that, well, of course, Karis is scared of sex because she's 19. She's only just had it once with someone deeply unpleasant. So she's got these feelings. She's got these cravings. But sex hasn't been a positive thing for her at all. It's only been
it's hard to know who's talking, if it's her or the alien.
Yeah.
Maybe she has a shameful view of sex, and then now she's like, oh, this can be nice, but every time I've left these situations, I felt really ashamed. And I'm like, Karis, I think maybe that's because you're possessed and you can't really consent. I don't know if you need to feel bad about this, my lovely. It's okay.
Yeah. I hope she's all right. I hope she gets into therapy.
Yeah,
I don't trust Torchwood to look after her.
Absolutely not. They're just going to put her on Flathome Island with all the others in that weird lighthouse. Like, in that weird hospital. Like, then that looks horrible as well. Can they not afford to clean the bloody walls?
Yeah. Just clean the places where you keep your victims tortured.
Maybe don't leave one man in charge of getting you everywhere on time, making your coffee and cleaning, because it's a big building.
It's a big building. There's a lot to do. They need more personnel.
They do, yeah. So at this point, Karis gives a weird monologue about sex, and they have assessed that they need to get her out of the host to kill it. But they're worried that they haven't made it in time because Karis seems like she's about to die. She's about to become rat jam. So Gwen offers herself up as another host because she feels so guilty about this that she would rather lose her life than watch this 18-year-old lose her life. To the team's confusion, Jack agrees to that because obviously he has a plan. Karis says that she was after like one last hit before she dies. But yeah, they've denied that to her because they're going to get the alien out and kill it. So Jack, I don't know if I can really explain what happens next, Steph. Do you want to give it a good go?
I can't. I don't know.
So his implication is that he's got plenty of extra life to give away. So he can give a bit of, I guess, what they're claiming it is like sexual energy to this alien so it can feel something without him sacrificing any of his life. But if that was the case, then surely Gwen and Owen would have suffered some considerable like energy depletion because they've all kissed the alien too.
Yeah.
Unless it's something that Jack has like the ability to do. Like maybe he's in tune with the energies of all of this alien stuff and he's like, oh, I'm just gonna impart some sexual energy onto you, I guess. Basically he crouches down and he just kisses her and some weird glowy stuff happens and then Jack's like, that's the buzz you get from the kiss, imagine what you'd get from the rest. I'm sorry. What?
It's so gross. It's like, it's so gross. Mean, he's got to be talking to the alien there.
Yeah,
but he's responding to, he's got her in front, like he can tell this is a 19-year-old girl.
Yeah.
They now know a girl who's like, when not possessed, really not very sexually experienced. Oh, it's minging.
Yeah, but I guess maybe he's sympathizing more with the alien. That it's like, this alien feeds off this energy and we're about to kill it. So I'm going to be compassionate and give it some sex energy. It's very strange. Something that I tell my friends with loads of previous people, I've introduced Torchwood to lots of people and I say, promise me one thing, we're going to start watching this show and you are not going to make your mind up about whether or not you like it until episode 5. Episode 1, sure, Gwen meets Torchwood. Episode 2, sex monster. Episode 3, Ghost in Splot. And it's only when we get to the later ones where they stop being ridiculous titles.
If you sat down and like brainstormed stupid Doctor Who monsters that you can only do in an adult setting,
yeah,
it's like they just went with the first ones they came up with.
Yeah, it's like they spun a wheel.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have sex possessing alien from a meteorite. Okay, anything else?
What if Cybermen were sexy?
Okay, so the alien comes out of Karis to possess Gwen, who's across the room. Jack has the same portable cell type thing that Owen was using earlier. It captures the ghostly pink smoke. And then the alien basically dies. And that's how that's that. that's what happens.
That problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think Gwen knows that the plan is for Jack to imprison the gas en route. I think Gwen does think this alien's going to possess her and she's going to be the new sex gas monster.
When the alien is dying, I think they're the same noises as the star whale, as the big hunk of meat in later episodes. I just really recognise the noise. I think they've just been like, on like the BBC library sounds, they're just like, spooky moan.
That's good ears if that's true. We'll have to look into that.
So the alien dies. Gwen is relieved that she's not about to die, obviously, because that would be a terrible first day on the job. To thank Jack, she gives him a kiss, which it's not crazy. Like, it's weird, but it's not like she makes out with him.
Yeah.
So I'm willing to accept it. The only thing is, like, she gives him a kiss and she says, thank you. But they're just always gazing at each other. Like, every time I rewatch early episodes of Torchwood, I'm like, where were they going with Jack and Gwen? It's like they've got two people in charge of directing their relationship. And each episode, they flip it back and forth, or even between scenes of whether he's like, oh, nice, I like you, Gwen Cooper, or, oh, we fancy each other. Like, I never know where they're going.
Yeah.
Because I don't want them to be flirting with each other.
Yeah. I think part of it is, I don't think they knew where they were going with Rhys. I have a theory that Rhys was meant to die permanently at the end of Series 1. And that would free up Gwen. If you wanted to give her a romantic story with Jack, then you could.
Not that that's going to be a problem for Gwen in other aspects.
But
No.
Well, but because I think because this is a show that definitely has a different idea of if she's having sex with someone while she has a boyfriend, that's not acceptable. That's her cheating on Reese. So for her to have a meaningful relationship, then that it needs to be a monogamous one, and it needs to be without Reese. And I wonder if they just liked Kai Owen, who is very, very good, and decided they wanted to keep him around.
So yeah, they have that weird moment, Jack and Gwen. It's basically the end of the episode, and we see that they've returned Karis home. It's obvious that they've explained to her dad what's been happening, which is a bold move, clearly initiated by Gwen, who wanted to bring her dad in right from the start because she's a child and she needs to be looked after. And it's actually gone really well. He's obviously upset by what his daughter's been through, but she bursts into tears and he gives her a big hug. She's got support at home now. Later, they go back to the hub. It's the go home Gwen Cooper thing. Go home, eat lasagna, have your life, and don't lose it. Then she does, I guess.
Yeah. And what's interesting here is that this is a mirror of a speech from the first series of Doctor Who, from the first episode of the new Doctor Who, where Rose Tyler has met this mysterious man, the Doctor, and he says to her, yes, the world is full of aliens and bigger things than you can ever know, but they're not for you. Go home, have beans on toast, forget me, Rose Tyler.
Yeah.
So it's sort of an explicit mirroring. And I think what's interesting is in Doctor Who, we know that Rose isn't going to go home and forget the Doctor. She's going to get properly involved. And that's going to be a really positive thing. Whereas in Torchwood, because that's sort of a sort of evil twin of Doctor Who in some ways, we kind of know that Gwen isn't going to be able to go home and have lasagna and switch off. She is going to going to get as obsessed as the others.
All of the people who work for Torchwood have the Jackie Tyler syndrome of what happens to the people who are left behind. And so what they need is to not run away, not try to dive into it head first, but to keep as close to their human lives as they can. And Gwen is their gateway to do that, I guess. So the last thing we see is Reese and Gwen chatting, and she's still a bit dazed like she was in episode 1. She's obviously like just processing everything that she's been through, and he's like, oh, why are you not listening to me? Are you okay? But this time she tunes right back in and she's like, yeah, I'm sorry, like busy day or whatever. They have a nice moment and they kiss and they end up going to bed to have a little night together. And it's really nice. It's showing that she is holding on to her humanity just as Jack has told her to for now. So that's our finish.
There we go. That's episode 2.
What would you say is the most Torchwood moment of this episode?
I think you wanted to be the Torchwood MMS text, which is so Torchwood. But I think for me, it's the fact that they do this thing twice. It's the fact that they conduct interviews unattended, one person at a time. And the second time, they're even more irresponsible than the first. At least the first time, Owen is keeping an eye on Gwen on the monitor. When Owen goes and does it, they don't even bother.
They're not even watching.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right. That's probably it. Another failure to take the information you have and learn from it and to keep your team safe. Just basic investigation skills. Absolutely not done right. What a terrible organisation.
Such a terrible organisation.
So, deaths so far. Episode 1, Susie killed 4 people.
I don't think they are directly... unless we blame Gwen for releasing the monster. But I don't think that's fair
No,
either.
it's human error.
Yeah. And I think if there was a police officer who, let someone go free and then there was a bunch of deaths, we would not want that police officer to be, kept up at night thinking it was their fault.
Yeah, exactly.
And
so this episode, then, no deaths as a direct result of Torchwood incompetence.
Yeah.
A couple of mistakes along the way, but
and
no
to be
direct...
fair, they have saved a lot of lives.
Yeah, that's true. 3 civilian deaths, then.
Yeah.
3 deaths of people not a part of Torchwood. Caused by Torchwood. Episode 2, surprisingly good for that then.
Yeah.
Good track record in episode 2. Well done, Torchwood. You have served your purpose of protecting the Earth. Any final thoughts on that episode?
So this is the episode that introduces sex properly into Torchwood, and it is a source of grim misery for everyone. I am interested to see if that is something consistent in this show, or whether we get another side of it that shows that sometimes sex can be a positive and wonderful thing, or if it just remains horrible.
Hard to say. We still don't really know which direction the show's going in at this point. The tone is all over the place. But the one thing we are maintaining is that fundamentally this is a story of Gwen entering an organisation that makes people lose their humanity, and Jack's realisation of that and a desperate attempt to stop that from happening to another person and hopefully turn Torchwood around for the better. So, episode 3 we have coming up is what me and Adam called Ghost in Splot.
I really like episode 3. I'm excited to get to it.
I love episode 3. Yeah.
Okay,
cool.
Wonderful. All right, well, thank you once again for talking to me about Torchwood.
Thank you, Steph, and thank you, Torchwood.
Thank you, Torchwood.
If there's any more takes on things that we're desperately trying to make sense that you have, I'd be interested to hear people's thoughts.
And I particularly want anyone who's got something to say about something we haven't picked up on as well. Like especially if you've got a favourite quote that we haven't talked about or a favourite moment.
Mm-hmm.
I love hearing people's tiny little observations and details.
And also, I guess, follow us on Twitter and Instagram. If you're watching this on YouTube, then our social media links will be in the description down below. And if you're watching this somewhere else, or if you're listening to this somewhere else, then I don't know where you can find those things.
I think there's a thing called show notes, which is like the blurb for your episode of a podcast. We should learn what those are and put them there.
Look in there. We're going to know about this one day.
We're going to be such experts.
We're the true amateurs. Yeah. Cool. Thank you very much, everyone. Hope you're enjoying our journey, and we will speak to you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.